Alrighty, welcome, folks. My name is Josh Gordon. I'm the senior editor at theleadpastor.com. Super pumped to be sitting with new friend, kingdom partner, shall we say, Brandon from preachandlead.com. Brandon, it's been really great getting to know you over the last couple of months, and I'm really excited to sit and talk with you about strategic planning, the importance of strategic planning for churches, and I think you've got a ton of value to add. So, man, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself and what you're up to, and then we got some juicy questions to dive into. So,
yeah, man. Well, thanks again for having me on, and really excited to talk about this. A little bit about me. I'm the blessed husband of my high school sweetheart. We got 4 kids, and I've been in pastoral ministry for quite a while. So, pastored in Kentucky and Ohio, and most recently Indiana, and now I spend my full-time energy helping pastors work through strategic planning, things like this, and also preaching, and also I consult churches. So this subject is really important to me because I've seen the value in the churches that I lead, making sure that we have an actual roadmap for what God is calling us to do, and actually turning that into an aligned action plan. Because leadership is fun and it's hard, and the hard part of it is not just leading people, but it's also leading ourselves and making sure that we're staying on track. And so that is all kind of all combined into this subject. So,
oh man,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, and I'm excited. I think there's a lot of really great stuff for listeners/viewers, and yeah, you just said something I think that is so important, which is leading yourself, and that's an odd kind of a concept, I think. So I'm excited to see how that folds into everything that you have to say. Yeah, so let's just dive right in. Let's just off the top, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Talk about what a strategic plan is. And then specifically how it helps our churches, and yeah.
So a strategic plan it's really the tactical part of making vision happen in reality. So as leaders, we have to be the chief clarity officer. We have to be able to be the one who's saying, this is where we are and this is where we're going. Obviously by prayer and petition with collaboration with our team. But at the end of the day, we're needing to lead toward a vision because God's kingdom is expanding and pressing forward, and we're a part of that. And so a strategic plan is simply the steps that we're going to take as a congregation to make sure that we're all aligned toward that vision that God's given us. And so a strategic plan, you can get real granular, and what I like to help churches do is identify a very clear and vivid picture of a mission-fueled future, which is what I call a vision, and that being about 5 years into the future at the very least. And from there, we work backwards. Okay, what does it look like to make that happen? What needs to be true a year from now in order for us to be on track to see that 5-year vision come to fruition? So strategic plan is simply a plan to align our resources and the gifts that God has given us toward that vision that he's given us as we live out our mission.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's super practical, and it's about taking the heart of our calling and even the specifics of, so I'm a pastor for New Life Fellowship in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. So the calling that God has for me and for our church, and okay, let's meets the road. It's time to actually start laying out the resources and clarifying steps. And so the strategic plan, essentially, from what I'm hearing you correctly, kind of makes sure all of that is cohesive and it's well thought through and it makes good sense.
Yeah, it's about being intentional as a church, making sure that we're actually heading to a place on purpose.
Yeah.
Because so often when I'm working with pastors, what I see them facing are 3 challenges. The first challenge is that they are experiencing as a church a lot of activity. They're trying to do a lot of things, but they're experiencing little progress in terms of the mission being lived out, making disciples, equipping the saints for the work of ministry. We're doing a lot of stuff, a lot of programs, a lot of activity, but we're not seeing the progress that we want to see. And oftentimes it's because we're experiencing the second challenge is living in the Sunday to Sunday cycle, because Sunday's always coming.
Yeah.
Sunday is always coming. And so like we end up just working in the ministry, and strategic planning is an invitation to work on the ministry.
Yeah.
And it's not always going to be the thing that like is urgent. We have to do this, even though at the end of the day, it really is, because a lot of pastors, and the third challenge is that we are operating as kind of lone wolf, stressed and overworked.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a big picture of where, like, okay, we need more servants. We need more workers into the field, right? Because the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Well, okay, if we have an influx of 20 people who say, I want to serve and be a part of that, then in order to get them involved and actually have that be useful, you have to see the bigger picture and where we're headed. What do we need? And what does our community need from us as a healthy disciple making church? And so it's all connected to that. So if you're a pastor who thinks like strategic planning is not for the church world, it's for the business world, and we just got to, preach the gospel and that's it, I would beg to differ and say your role as a shepherd is also being a leader, because shepherds lead. And if you're going to lead and align your church, a strategic plan, whether you call it that or not, is vitally important if you're going to actually lead people toward a place that they're not going automatically. And so many churches, all of us have seen this, so many churches are just drifting and they're struggling and they're in decline. And I'm not okay with that. I don't want to see that happen.
No, not at all. I mean, there's a couple passages that come to mind. Jesus talking. Oh gosh, I would say it's Luke or Mark. I get the references all get confused in my head. But Jesus talking about like, a person builds a tower, and then they run out because they didn't actually plan all the resources. And then that tower actually is becoming a source of shame for, or people walk by and like, oh, that's a symbol. Like that guy didn't think everything through. And then in Proverbs, my dad used to say this to all the time, to be like, go to the ant, consider her ways and be wise. And one of the wild things about ants that I discovered, which I think actually is very relevant to this conversation, is that if you put like a colony of ants, so we have, we've got lots of ants up here in Canada, but in Canada, there's like a very sharp change from like fall into winter, and winter is like everything's dormant, everything's freezing cold. And in those situations, ants will actually store up food and what they need to get them through winter. A colony of ants in the Amazon jungle, they don't do that because they don't have that cycle. And so it's so interesting to me that even ants, like there's an awareness of the future and thinking ahead to the future, thinking about what they need in order for the colony to grow and to survive. And if God put that into the instincts of ants, like what are we called to as stewards of his kingdom, stewards of his kids? Like the most valuable resource God has is his kids, and like we're stewards of that. We're stewards of energy, we're stewards, like of course we're stewards of money. And I think that a strategic plan, and I completely echo you on this point, like if you're not thinking strategically about the best way to spend your money, the best way to spend your church's people capital, the energy that you have in a day, and making sure it's actually moving the needle in the things that God's called you as a pastor and called you as a church to do, I think you're missing the boat. Like, I think that you're a bad manager, and like, I mean, there's parables of bad managers in the New Testament as well. And I don't want to be in that situation at all. And so, so obviously strategic plans, super important. We need to have them. So who should be part of the process? I don't think churches are supposed to be democracy, but you also just can't, like you referenced being a lone wolf, and actually that's not a good thing. And so who are the people that should be involved in a strategic plan? And then after that, we can talk like, what are the different parts of a strategic plan? What's the process, that type of thing. But yeah, start with like the core team, the people that should be involved in developing this.
So it depends on the church. I work with a wide range of pastors and churches in various denominations. And so for any given church, it depends. But if you have staff members, they should be a part of it. And if you have a leadership board or something like that, like they should be a part of it. The people who have a level of buy-in to the church, who you can look to and say, these are the people who are committed, and they're also in positions of authority and leadership, they should be part of it. What I always tell pastors, even ones who come from, a context where it's expected that they'll be like Moses and go up on the mountain, hear from God, and bring down the tablets and tell us what we need to do. I always encourage them, bring people along for the journey, because when they can weigh in, they'll have greater buy-in. So if they're a part of that, then for one, like the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is alive in you and is alive in me and it's alive in your people. So invite them into it and know that they're going to add value that you don't, because they're gifted in different ways from the Spirit of God. And so I would say your staff, your leadership team, whether that's an elder board or a different kind of structure, deacons, whatever it is, depending on your background and your church tribe. But those people should be involved. And this should also be the product of a lot of prayer and a lot of discussion before we get to a point of let's sit down and actually put this together.
100%. I love that people buy in with authority and with leadership. I think that's key. I also love that phrase of if people weigh in and they have that buy-in. I think that's really excellent. And to me, it just speaks of there's wisdom in the multitude of counselors. And so this is potentially a rabbit trail. I love rabbit trails occasionally, but sometimes so I don't necessarily want to run down a rabbit trail too deep, but
we can do it.
Yeah. In situations where there is that context where, okay, the pastor is the CEO and the CFO and the CTO, and maybe there's a specific culture where, okay, we look to the pastor for marching orders. Yeah. In that situation, what are some of the dangers of not pulling people in? So if there's a pastor in that situation, maybe they recognize it, they don't like it, but what are some of the dangers that they could run into if they don't pull other people in for extra perspective or whatever?
In a context like that, oftentimes the pastor is insulated from what the regular lives are from the people that they lead. Oftentimes they're put on a pedestal, and so like that frames how people talk to them and what they share with them, and so there's like some psychology there for sure. The other thing that I would say is that for pastors who are in that kind of a spot, recognize what Moses eventually recognized, and that is it's too much for one person. He had to bring in other leaders to help him be the leader of Israel. Like he had to bring in others to help judge and provide counsel. There's wisdom in a multitude of counsel, like you mentioned, and Scripture in the New Testament teaches us a plurality of leadership when it talks about the elders. And so when you're the only one who's setting vision, you're limited by your own perspective and you're limited by your own level of awareness. And so there might be the pastor who's in that situation, wants to bring in other people, but feels the pressure of their people kind of expecting them to be the one who comes up with a vision. And I was actually just having a conversation yesterday with a pastor I'm working with, and we were having the same exact conversation. And what I encouraged him to say essentially is, yes, God has given me this mantle of leadership, but I encouraged him, like, just because you're responsible for something doesn't mean you have to do everything that is related to that responsibility. You're inviting other people to be involved in the process, but let's not make a mistake in understanding this. As the leader, what's not going to happen is that you put your rubber stamp of approval on a vision that you totally don't believe in. Like, that's not going to happen either. So some pastors might feel a little bit weary about bringing in certain people because they think that, they might kind of take over. But in relational contexts, you either have people who are passive or aggressive. Right in the middle is assertive, and that's what you have to be as a pastor. Don't be passive. Don't let people walk all over you. Don't be aggressive. You don't have to prove anything to anybody, but be assertive and say, like, well, actually, this is more in line with where I believe we need to go, and here's the reasons why.
Yeah.
So that's a whole, long answer to your question, but it's definitely something that any pastor who finds themselves leading alone, I would say very lovingly and assertively, you are leading in an unbiblical manner.
Yeah.
Because the function of a pastor, a teacher, an evangelist, Ephesians 4 lays it out that God gave you to the church to be someone who equips the saints for the work of ministry, so that the body of Christ might be built up, so that it reaches full maturity. You are to equip the saints for the work of ministry, and so you shouldn't be the only one doing all the ministry. That's unbiblical. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's something you said that I really don't want to skate past, because I think it's really key. You said that when someone's if a pastor's like on a pedestal, or if they're leading alone and they're used to like being the one out front, that they actually don't actually have a clear, accurate perception of what's actually going on in the church, because people, let's say for better or for worse, but people for worse will put on a mask when they're talking to you, and they're presenting a reality that's not actually true. And so to go through all the work of a strategic plan, and then it executes and it actually fails, well, you actually didn't have good data in the first place. And so I kind of wonder, maybe this is the end of the rabbit trail, I kind of wonder if a pastor's in that position, maybe a strategic plan isn't the most important problem to tackle. Maybe it's like, okay, how do I actually start breaking down this culture of pastor equals God, and start creating a culture where, no, we're a priesthood of believers. We all are doing the work of the ministry, and my job is to equip you to do that, and to start to kind of like rebuild or develop that type of a culture. And that's a whole other difficult challenge. And so I don't know, any final comments on that? Or
it speaks to the preparation process, the tilling of the soil of your church, not just your leaders, but your whole church. What I often encourage pastors to do as they're starting to go about this intentional process of strategic planning and vision casting, and really putting together a strategic vision for the next 5 years, I encourage them to preach on ecclesiology a lot.
Oh, I see.
Who is the church? Who are we as the body of Christ? We're the kingdom of God, the priesthood. We're the people of God. We're the house of God. Like being able to, we're the bride of Christ. We are stronger when we're operating as the adopted sons and daughters of the Most High God. And like we all have a part to play in this. We have family contributions that we are having, and we have all been equipped with a gift to offer it. So it's all part of that, because, and really what I would say is, even if it's your own personal strategic plan, being intentional about how to start breaking down those kinds of barriers is really important. And so it's oftentimes a process of preparation and tilling of the soil that has to precede the actual, we're going to put this together.
Yeah. So it's not, I'm disappearing into up the mountain and then coming back down with, here's the strategic plan the Lord has given me. It's like, okay, there's probably an element of like retreating a bit and like getting the lay of the land. It's like, okay, here's the plan forward. But also you have to be aware of communication and preparing the people who are going to be ultimately, ideally executing and carrying this out. So I think that's really wise, a really wise element to highlight there. So when it comes to the actual creation of the strategic plan, what are the main sections that a strategic plan needs to include? And maybe those are wrapped around specific questions that you're answering or whatever, but what is a good strategic plan? What are the things it touches on?
So it's a really big topic. So hear me when I say this, and this is just kind of a bridge from the last question to this. What we're not saying, Josh and myself, for you, those of you watching or listening, neither one of us are saying as the pastor you shouldn't be in tune with the Spirit of God and being deeply in prayer and have an idea of how God's leading. You should be doing
100%.
those things, right?
Absolutely.
So as we prepare, we're spending time deep in prayer. We are asking the Lord for that vision, because in my experience, a strategic plan without a vision that we're actually chasing after is really pointless, because the strategic plan has to have direction. So the direction that we ultimately want to have is a mission-fueled future. It's a picture of a mission-fueled future. So just to make sure that we're really clear, because a lot of times vision can be one of those things like discipleship in the church where we talk about it, we don't define it, but we talk about it a lot, and then we oftentimes don't do it.
Yeah.
So strategic planning. What I recommend pastors do, I actually, with the ones I coach, I give them a 6-month long discussion guide. So typically a board, they'll meet once a month. And so I give them specific questions to answer and discuss each one of those meetings for 6 months leading up to the point where they would sit down and they would get their team together, their staff, their leaders, and they would have a leadership retreat where they spend some really focused time putting this together. So that's first thing. What I want to help them do is to go through 4 phases. The first phase is really, really important, but it's usually it's the scariest one. It's not as exciting. And that is to confront reality. We have to seek the Lord and say, how are we actually doing? And this is hard for pastors and for church leaders, lay leaders especially, is like, how do we measure the ministry? How do we actually grade how we're doing as a church? And so knowing that is, I put together a tool that I call the healthy ministry quotient. And really it's a way for us all to speak the same language and for us to measure the health of the church. Because a strategic plan has to account for where are we today, just as much as it has to account for where are we trying to go in the future. So confronting reality requires courageous conversations. So over the course of those 6 months of discussions, I'm encouraging these pastors to lean into the discomfort, because if, like you said, with the conversation about the pastor who's kind of on the pedestal, if we're not looking at reality with eyes wide open and addressing what is, then we're going to miss our starting point. And if you miss your starting point, you're ending up lost from the very beginning. So confront reality. The second part is to gain clarity. Okay, in light of where we are and where our struggles are, we have to start to prioritize what needs to be addressed. So this goes down to like, what are the systems in our church that are functioning well? Good, let's double down on those. What are the systems that aren't operating well? How's our finances? How's our team? What's required of us to make sure that we're operating efficiently in terms of how are we welcoming guests? How are we as a church? What is our culture like? So we have to start gaining clarity of like, okay, if we don't have a good giving system in our church where we're cultivating, generous members of our church and also encouraging those as they do and appreciating them, and teaching on it. If we don't have that, then what does it look like even to put that together? That's where we gain clarity. We have to start to understand things that we may not have ever tried to deal with. And then from confront reality, gain clarity, we have to formulate a plan. And that's where the strategic plan comes down. And what I recommend teams to do is to make it a thing where we get together. What I oftentimes recommend is we get together on a Friday and we're doing dinner and it's just, hey, what do we most love about our church? We're having that conversation. We're starting off on a positive note. And then Saturday, we're going to spend all day working through the results of our assessment of the health of the church. We're going to look at our attendance patterns. We're going to look at our giving patterns. We're going to look at how many baptisms we've had over the last 5 to 10 years. And we're going to start to understand without needing to make excuses. We're going to honor the past, but we're also going to look very clearly at the past. and where we are today. And then we're going to start to put together, all right, how is the Lord leading each of us? And we're going to have a really very specific conversation about what do we sense the Lord calling us to in this next season. And that's going to be the hardest conversation outside of the confronting reality piece. Because there's going to be plenty of people who they might have some thoughts that are really valuable, but they won't be willing to share it. So you got to have to facilitate that and get that out of them. But ultimately, what we're looking at is getting to a place where we can say, okay, maybe it's we see a need in our community that really needs to be addressed, and that we have a deep heart level burden about, and we believe that as the salt of the earth, that we can make things better in our community. All right, so what does that look like? So then the 5-year vision is we're going to solve, the level of homelessness in our city, and we're going to really start tackling that. Or we see that there's only 20% of people in our county or in our city who has a relationship with Jesus, or at least even just goes to church. So 80% of people don't. Well, then we need to start looking at how do we train our people to be evangelists and share their faith, and we're going to get really aggressive with that, and so that we can start to make an actual pivotal difference. And so from that 5-year very vivid vision that's going to be tweaked and worked through past Saturday, we need to start identifying, okay, what needs to be true a year from now for that to happen. And what I teach pastors to do is lead their team in like quarterly planning. So if the church's energy was focused on one thing for 3 months, we would make really good progress. And then we go to the next thing. So that first year, we've got 4, I call them intentional quarterly sprints.
Yeah.
And then from that 1 year mark, we are working from years 2 to 4 on 3 different initiatives, and we'll just work through them one at a time. And, that may mean that we've got to assign responsibilities and roles, and we have to put together teams to make sure that stuff is happening. And so confront reality, gain clarity, formulate a plan, and then the exciting part and the very diligent part that is oftentimes missed is execute the plan. And that's where accountability comes in. That's where we have to make sure that we're keeping our vision top of mind with our team. And but at the same time, the blessing that it does is it allows you to see the progress you're making in light of the vision that God's given you. And then instead of living in the Sunday to Sunday cycle, that, okay, our steps today have a very real connection to the vision for the future. And we're making sure that we're making progress. We're doing check-ins. And then as a pastor, when you have a strategic plan and you actually have given roles and responsibilities and everyone's bought in on the vision and you're communicating that to the church regularly and you're just driving it home, you're no longer that lone wolf, stressed out, overworked pastor. You're someone who's thriving and aligning the church toward what God wants to do.
Yeah, man, I just like, hearing you share everything and kind of thinking it through, and I kind of can't help but put that into perspective or in the context of my own, like not only the church I'm at, but also past experiences, like working at other churches. And I mean, I think a really formative experience I had, this is like, I was my final year of Bible college, and I did a couple of internships back to back, like field placements. And one of them was at a church plant that had like replanted itself. Still don't really understand exactly how it all worked, but it was a church plant that's on year 5, but still like they're meeting in a theater, and they had, like, I think there's like 50 or 60 different people who'd been there. And I look back on that time, and I think it was just it fits so well with what you were describing at the front end, in terms of like the front end of our conversation about lots and lots of activity, but not a lot of like traction. And so I think about that, and then I imagine the process of, okay, how do we put a strategic plan into place? And specifically, and maybe this ends up going too deep, we can't cover all this in this conversation, but where are the breaking points? Like, where are the spots where, okay, this is most likely a failure point, or if it's not going to work, it's going to be here. Or because of this. And so, for example, what you talked about, the which I think is so important, which is being honest about the past and being really clear, but also being really honest. And like, man, like I like to think I'm mature enough to do that, but at the same time, like, and I mean, how maybe give it a word of encouragement here. Like how do you help teams to do that without getting defensive or without feeling personally attacked or feeling insecure or feeling like, oh, like, do I have a place moving forward? Or like, yeah. So, so just kind of respond to that, I guess.
It's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It is. There is no way around it. When I think about our work as a pastor, and when I think about the way people view their church when they've been a part of it for a long time and they're deeply committed, that becomes a part of them. And so it's really important to give people permission to say, hey, we know that God has moved mightily in the past. We know that there's been plenty of good things that have come out of this ministry. Obviously, if we can actually say that, we say that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes God works in spite of our mess ups, and even in spite of our best efforts, he still does what he wants to do.
Thankfully.
Thankfully. However, we're still part of that process. And it's just a matter of, again, if we go through the process of 6 months of discussion where we're talking about these things and we're teaching, this is why I think it needs to be this kind of a longer process, which is not fun. But oftentimes us as pastors, like, we're thinking about the next thing. We go to a conference and we have a new strategy and we just like implement it right away. And then it fizzles out because we're at another conference a quarter later and everyone's like, I don't know what to do. Yeah. But we have to think longer. And this is why it's important to have these discussions and make it a normal thing for us to be honest with each other. It's building a culture of candor. And if you don't have a culture of candor already, it's best to say that to your team.
Yeah.
Hey guys, my assessment of our culture as a team is that we hold back. That sometimes we don't say what is really on our mind, and it could be for whatever reason, but for us to move forward and for the church to be healthy, we can't keep going down the same road. We have to be honest, not out of an attack, because that's not our heart, but out of an honoring of the calling and the mantle of authority that we have been given by God. We cannot put our head in the sands. We don't have when you signed up to be a leader, you got rid of that. And I also think, like, none of us who do that in our regular lives are living. We're not thriving when we put our head in the sand and avoid what is actually happening around us. So I would say there's some coaching that you can do with your team and help them to recognize how to speak to things. So there's some work by Steve Cuss. He wrote the book called Managing Leadership Anxiety, a great book. And Steve is a great leader who speaks to the relational dynamics a lot of leadership because it's just all there. He talks about there being 4 spaces relationally. There's the space between, like, yourself and God. There's the space inside yourself. There's the space inside the other person. And there's the space between you and that person. And making sure that we never attribute motive to somebody when we don't actually know what their reasons were or what they were trying to accomplish. That's what oftentimes we do, and that's where we get into trouble. Is, well, our leaders, if they weren't just trying to do this 10 years ago, we would be further along the road, right? Like, if they were being courageous, then we wouldn't have to deal with all these maintenance issues on our building. If they would have just decided to deal with this 10 years ago, we would be able to actually focus on, funding more ministry versus funding fixing our building. Instead, we say, the space between us is a more accurate way of saying that, hey, they dealt with the challenges that they were dealing with. They decided not to move forward with these, maintenance issues. But guys, here's the truth. We have to, because we don't want to do that to the next generation of leadership behind us. We don't want to kick the can down the road. And for whatever reason they did, and I don't know why, but here's what we're not going to do. And so it's like recognizing how to have that conversation. And also it's just continuing to remind your team, like, hey guys, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
And that eases people's minds, even though you're saying you're going to be uncomfortable. It kind of allows them to have some space in the discomfort and just be okay with it.
100%. The other thing so two things come to mind. So the first one is that setting the expectation that this is going to be uncomfortable. I'm probably going to screw this up somehow because I haven't done this a lot. So, but just, it's better to charge into it than to avoid it. So let's do it together. I think that's huge. Setting that expectation is massive. And the other thing that really comes to mind as well is that we also have like Romans 8:28. Well, I think it's just like the safety net as a believer. And like, you know what? Okay, 10 years ago, we wish they would have done that, but they didn't do that. And the reality is God is going to use that and he's going to redeem it. Like we're operating in the world of redemption, which to me is just so exciting and so wonderful. And it's the silver thread that you can rely on is being developed as, through all the crappy stuff that you're going through, all the offense and the hurt feelings and all that stuff that you're going to navigate. So the redemption piece, I think, is just, to me, is just huge. The other thing is, I can't imagine like how hard that is to go through this and to initiate a new strategic plan on your own. And so this is sort of like a great on-ramp for you, because like you've mentioned, you've done this type of thing, and you support church teams and leadership teams, and you do consulting and coaching. Like, I can't imagine trying to do this without somebody walking me through the process. Or and I've been involved in these kind of conversations in the past as well, where somebody comes in to actually facilitate conversations also. Talk a little bit about that. And then I just would request that you self-promote at this point as we're wrapping up as well. And like, because I want my heart for the lead pastor and anything that I'm publishing and producing the lead pastor is that I'm building connections and building bridges between pastors and like people who are also passionate about church, passionate about the kingdom, love Jesus with all their hearts, and want to help the kingdom grow. And so that's my heart behind here. So like maybe talk a little bit about, leading a team through strategic planning on your own versus with a coach or a mentor or a facilitator. And then talk a little bit more about you specifically and what that would look like if someone was to do that with Brandon from preachandlead.com.
Sure. My background goes back to my bent in leadership is to be strategic. I want to make sure that we're being very intentional. I love the word intentional. And when I was in the position of, I was a lead pastor at a church that had been through a lot of stuff, and was in need of revitalization. I spent my first year largely talking about ecclesiology. Sunday sermons, we're talking about who are we as the church, who do we need to be, who's God called us to be, how can we come together and do a good work in our community, because we're better together. We need to be a part of this, and recognize as we were starting to lay the groundwork that it was already automatic in my mind that we needed to develop a 5-year strategic vision. Because I wanted to make sure that we were aligned and addressing some of these really big things that needed to be addressed. All the while, I'm, putting together systems and rebuilding things and all that as well. But what I recognize for me personally, this is what I did. I know how to do this stuff, but I wanted to bring someone else in to facilitate that, especially the retreat, so that I could participate in it and I didn't have to facilitate it, because that's very different. Having a set of eyes that is not entrenched in the day-to-day and can just kind of come from the outside and say, hey guys, have you seen this? Because always we're like, No, I didn't know that thing because it's over there in the corner, but it's always been there, so we didn't notice it.
Yeah.
It's a mess. We really
Selective
need to address
blindness.
that. So
Selective
like,
blindness clicks after a
absolutely.
while.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, so you're telling me that this has been happening for 30 years, that you guys have been in decline. Oh, I guess we have. Yeah, I didn't realize it's been that long, right? And so, man, when I was in the shoes of, similar to what somebody who's watching this or listening to this, you're a pastor who's thinking about, you know what, we need a strategic plan. I'm tired of being in the Sunday to Sunday cycle. I'm tired of having a lot of stuff that we're doing thrown against the wall and not making a lot of progress, not making a lot of disciples. I recognized in myself that this process is going to be a lot better if I bring someone else in who can walk us through it so that we can just be in tune with the Spirit and really be a part of the team. Because as a leader, you can do it. Like, you can do this on your own. You can. And I teach pastors how to do it, because not all of them want to fly me in and all that. Like, it's a lot of stuff. But if you want to make the most out of this and really free yourself up from the burden of having to facilitate and then also participate as well, then, man, bringing somebody else, it doesn't have to be me, just bringing somebody else in who knows what it's like to be in your shoes, who knows what it's like to put together a strategic vision and leading toward that. It's vital. It's vital. I'm actually heading to a church in California here in a week from when we're recording this, and I'm leading their team through this process. And I'm so excited to work with them because they have a particular context, and they have experienced some decline, but they also recognize the need to be honest, the need to confront reality, the need to move forward. And it's just going to be a beautiful, messy, wonderful process. So
yeah,
I mean, just functionally, logistically, Friday we're going to spend time together. I'm going to ask them questions about why they love their church and what brought them there originally, and just get them to just reminisce a little bit. And then Saturday we're getting to work. And we're working together to ultimately have that 5-year vision. And by the time we're all done, Monday morning, they're going to have a plan of what they need to focus on for the next 3 months, and then 3 months after that, and so on and so forth. And I'll be working with the pastor for 3 months after that, just kind of helping them fine tune how do you actually communicate the vision, because that's a whole other thing. How do you actually implement the strategic plan? Well, it involves a lot of reminding people of what the vision is and where we're going. So if you're a pastor and you want to break the Sunday to Sunday cycle, I did create a free resource for you. It's called 3 Steps Intentional Pastors Use to Lead Their Church to Health. And you can get it at preachandlead.com/intentional steps. Just all together, preachandlead.com/intentional steps. And that'll get you on a path where you can start to say, okay, what kind of vision has God given me, just personally as a minister of the gospel, and then start to assess the health of your church, and then just what's one thing that I can start making progress on. And ultimately, what I believe is going to happen is you're going to have renewed energy in your leadership and renewed passion for the work that God's given you. And really, it just comes down to, okay, I'm going to make sure that my Monday through Sunday, the day in and day out, is very intentional and not just focused on making Sunday happen, but also in light of thinking long, because God's called us to this as a marathon, not just a sprint.
Yeah. I think it's like Eugene Peterson. This quote just popped in my head from college. It was a long time ago, but comment something similar to what you just said about, a lifestyle of long obedience in one direction. And I was like, I'm
long obedience in the same direction. I love that.
Yeah. Just so good. So good. Man, there's so many nuggets in this conversation, and I'm really thrilled to have been able to hang out with you for a bit. I'm really hoping we can have some follow-up chats, because like there's things I'm like, ooh, I have more questions about this. I'm super jazzed to do that, hopefully. But man, there's just, it's just making notes while you're talking, like a scratch pad filled with stuff here. Man, thank you so much for your time today. And so if you're watching this, please check out Brandon Kelley, preachandlead.com/intentional steps. And also super stoked to be hopefully featuring Brandon in upcoming newsletter. So you can make sure you get that at theleadpastor.com/subscribe. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, guys. I hope you have an awesome day. God bless you. And we will talk again soon.